Let me see. All right. So finally, this is the very first live that we're doing in BlockCode, and I'm so happy to introduce you all to Amiti Uttarwar. She's a Bitcoin Core contributor. Hi, Amiti. Thank you so much for your time today.
Hi, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think that we have to, if we're going to do the basics, I think that we have to do this introduction properly. What is a Bitcoin Core contributor?
um, well, I would say a Bitcoin Core contributor is anybody who's gone to the GitHub page, that's Bitcoin/Bitcoin Core, and made a contribution to the project. So what that means is there's this open source project, and it lives on that GitHub page, and it anybody is able to make a recommendation of how the code could improve. So there's a
Amazing.
process for how recommendations get accepted, but so that has some nuance and details to it. But really, anybody can propose it, and anybody can help other proposals come forward. So I would say contributors are people who are looking at the code, who are reviewing other people's code, and who are proposing improvements as well.
Great. So now that we have this out of the way, let's just start with the basics again. How does Bitcoin Core development works? Can I do it? Can anybody do it?
Yeah, so it's possible for anybody to do it. There's, if you just go to the GitHub repo, which we could link um, the address of, but there is a lot of challenges to do it in a reasonable way. And so, for example, if you don't know how to write the code of these languages, right, it's very hard to make a improvement proposal or PR, which is short for pull request, which is exactly the small chunks of code that are being changed. However, there's a lot of different ways that you can contribute to the development of Bitcoin Core. So, at one level, there's the email list, and that's where a lot of more conceptual discussions occur. And that's where kind of big changes and looking ahead to the future. And that's not the only place, that's the most official ongoing place. But if you're going to conferences, then people might be presenting projects that they're thinking about, or there's different universities and academic research that's happening, and individuals who are just digging in themselves. And so there's a lot of ways in which the seeds of ideas are planted and really develop into something that can be made more concrete. And then and so then the process of those bigger changes is eventually formalizing them into something called a bit, which is short for Bitcoin Improvement Proposal. And that is a way that the community can review the specifications. Still conceptual. A lot of times there's a example implementation to help identify exactly how this would work. But at a high level, here's an idea for an improvement. And so that's right now the stage that Schnorr and Taproot are in. They're very explicit, tangible improvement suggestions, but they're in the bit phase. There is some example implementation, so that example code, but it's still trying to get that buy-in at that higher level. And
All
so
right.
that's one way of doing the high level conceptual collaboration. And then another way, which is to be in the code. And a really good way to get started there is to be looking at the tests and trying to review other PRs that are looking at the tests. And I think that you really familiarize yourself with the process of the GitHub project. There's some sort of maybe etiquette that you could call, where we use a system where you can ACK, ACK, or NACK, NACK, and there's different levels of acking. And so that's pretty much, it's pretty much a method for giving a thumbs up versus a thumbs down. And you have to explain more reasoning. If you just, drop an emoji, then it doesn't mean as much. But if you say, okay, I agree with these changes, and here are all of the tests that I did, and this is why I don't think it's going to break anything, and why I think it's an improvement, then that can help move the proposal forward. And same if you don't agree. If you think that this doesn't make sense or has harmful behavior or is not functioning as intended, you can express that via knack, here's what is wrong, or something like that. So usually people are very supportive, and I don't see that many knacks. I will see some, well, this is something to consider, and I'm hesitant or worried about this. Or, okay, well, I think this is a good idea. So that would be a concept act. This is a good idea, but the implementation has these problems. And then there are some, so basically the idea is to come to a community loose consensus around how is this change going to impact the system? Is it beneficial for the code? Is it problematic? And then eventually, based on the reviews left by the community, there are a few maintainers who have the ability to merge changes into Bitcoin, the repo, so that it's on the main branch. And every 6 months, the main branch gets taken, it gets explicitly packaged, it gets translated, and it gets tested by a lot of different people. So if that's something you're interested in helping, but you don't necessarily know the details of the code, I think that's a really great place to help with the project, like with Bitcoin Core specifically, because we're always looking for more testers, because people use it in different ways. And, the developers try to think about that and cater to that, but we never know. So you can test it out in that phase, say, hey, I found this unexpected behavior, etc., or it all looks good to me. And then that's what gets signed by the lead maintainer and distributed for release. That's what 0.20 is the current going through the release cycle right now. And so now changes that I'm working on right now will be packaged, if accepted, will be packaged into 0.21. And so that will be released in approximately 6 months.
Okay, just to have it completely clear, every single time that you put a change, every time that you make a proposal for a change, it takes about 6 months for it to be a consensus if it's going to be implemented or not.
Yeah, well, kind of. So yeah, so it goes through different stages, right? And if right now, because we're going through 0.20 release cycle, you'll have the longest. If my changes get merged today, it won't be packaged until the 6-month release. But say we're 2 weeks away from the release, right? There are ideas of you want to make big changes earlier in the cycle so they have longer to be tested. But if you're close to the release and you make a small change and then it gets bundled in, it could be released within a couple of weeks. And but also, at the end of the day, it's up to the users to decide if they want to run the software, if they want to upgrade, or so there's different kind of levels of buy-in.
Yeah, great. Perfect. Well, you already know what I'm saying because, guys, she speaks a little bit of Spanish. We're going to see that later. All right. Now, you mentioned what you've been working on. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What you've been working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, let me start by kind of describing the area that I've been attending to. So Bitcoin is money, and it's a totally different form of money. Our existing systems are fiat currencies that are totally centralized with governments and banks. And so when we're creating this decentralized system, a fundamental question is, how do we get everybody to agree? And this is the consensus question and this is the innovation of the blockchain, which is we can have this set of rules that every single person can validate for themselves. And every single person can keep a record of who has how much money to make sure that you can't cheat, right? That's simple. That's the blockchain. That's the brilliance of proof of work. So one important component of the system that interacts with consensus, but isn't exactly consensus, is the peer-to-peer network. And that's the ability to pass messages amongst one another and between each of the nodes. Because great, if I see a transaction, I can tell it's valid. And you see the same transaction, you can also determine for yourself that it's valid. But if I never see that transaction, then we're speaking different languages, right? Or maybe, I guess a better metaphor would be, even if we had the ability to speak the same language, if we can never get on the phone and talk to each other, what does it matter, right? We're speaking to different rooms that we can't hear each other. And so I guess in this metaphor, consensus would be the language. And so the peer-to-peer network is really important because it is what allows everybody to be passing those messages. And the messages, the main ones, are blocks and transactions. Oh, there was a new transaction. Oh, there was a new block. Okay, and that allows each node to validate it for itself. And one more message that's really important is addresses, and that's pretty much where the nodes are so that they can connect to one another. Like, hey, my friend just hopped onto the network. This is her address, so send messages with her as well, and she can figure out where other people are located in order to talk to them. So the peer-to-peer network really focuses on this message passing idea. And it's actually really, really hard because you don't want to trust your peers. You want to talk to them, but you don't want them to know exactly which transactions are yours, because that's the idea of privacy. You don't want, because if they can identify which transactions are yours, they can connect your on-chain activity to your off-chain via your IP address. Maybe they can link that back to your home address or even your real-world identity. Of course, that's a couple of hops, but the idea of privacy is trying to make that a big gap. So they don't know that it's Amiti who's spending, 500 sats and she's sending it to this store. So you want to get your message out, but you don't want people to know that it's yours. That's one thing that's difficult. Another one is you don't want to trust your peers. So you don't know if they're just going to send you a whole load of nothing. And you want to make sure that one malicious peer, one adversary, can't just spam you with so many messages that you're not able to participate in the actual network and get real messages. So you have to limit them and make sure that they're not using too much of your own resources. Mm-hmm. You have to distribute your time, your attention, your computing power, your bandwidth, etc. That's another problem that makes it really hard. And there's a lot of these sort of constraints that are in tension with one another. That when you're designing for one of them, you're like, okay, well, we could do this and that will make it robust. But then, oh no, that will have this trade-off. So how do you stay connected to the network? How do you make sure you're getting the latest block? How do you validate that your transaction has been propagated successfully? So this is the peer-to-peer network, and these are concerns of which. And this is something that a lot of really, really smart people have been thinking about for some time. And it's been really fun and very challenging, but really exciting to get deeper into the weeds. Like, I've been working on Bitcoin full time for a little less than a year. So I honestly just feel like I'm starting to truly understand how this aspect works. But my main focus and project lately has been around something called transaction rebroadcasting. So,
okay.
So when you you form a transaction, right? And you say, I want to pay 500 sats to store X. And then you broadcast it to the network. You say, hey, everybody, here it is. Here's the transaction. It's signed so you can tell it's valid, and et cetera, et cetera. And then you wait, and you hope that by broadcasting that it has made it to a mempool of the miner so that it can get mined into a block. But sometimes it might not. There could be issues. Maybe your network connection wasn't very good, so you weren't actually connected. Or maybe it's a really competitive fee rate market, so people had it, but then they got rid of it because it wasn't like high enough of a fee rate. There's all sorts of things that could happen. So for these reasons, if it's been a while and you don't see that your transaction's been mined, then you might want to tell the network again, hey, don't forget about this transaction. So the existing way that that's implemented is it's bad for privacy. It's overeager. So and it's only the source wallet. So you're pretty much saying, here are all of my transactions. And then another block was mined, and you're like, oh, here they are again. And then, oh, another block was mined. Okay, here are my transactions, which is the opposite of what you want. Because as I was saying, you don't want a spy to be able to identify, okay, this is the node that the transaction was coming from. So I'm trying to make it better. I'm trying to have it be less frequent, and I'm trying to have it so that you throw in some other transactions. You go, here are a bunch of transactions. Maybe some of them are mine. Maybe some of them aren't. You can't tell, but it's odd that they haven't been rebroadcast yet. So just in case you don't have them, here they are.
All right. It's very cool how you put it. Like you're trying to eliminate the spies in the network. Like let's not what's the word? Snitches. Let's not have any snitches in the network.
Yeah, well, I think you can't really, because you want to keep it an open network. So if someone's trying to be a snitch, someone's trying to be a spy, go ahead. But let's not give them any of our secrets, right? It's like if you post something to Facebook or Twitter, right? Expect the whole internet to be able to see it. Don't post your secrets.
Right, very very important. Thank you for the reminder. Also, don't use the same password everywhere, but that's another discussion we're not ready for. Um, cool. Okay, so you were talking about privacy for transactions in the mempool. Is there an easy way to explain how this works and why is this important? Let's say we're talking. Um, my daughter just sent me bitcoins using my local Bitcoin address, and well, I don't really care who the hell knows anything. I just want the money. At user level, how this privacy that we're working on works for me. Why does it matters to me as a user?
Yeah, absolutely. So one way I think about it, and I think this use case is different, but I don't want my entire credit card statement to be public information. I don't think it would be that problematic, but then I'd have to go look at it and I'd be like, okay, well, if this person who doesn't really like me that much knew that I spent this much money on who knows, socks, like right, if somebody,
What the
maybe
hell were
somebody
you
would
doing
be
with
like,
someone's
wow, she spent $200 on socks, this lady's crazy, and then create a whole, who knows what they could do like with that information. Maybe they would just start targeting me, and all of my advertisements would only be socks, and I'd be like, oh no, my sock addiction. It's like something that seems so harmless really can be spun out of control in this digital information age. And if all of this information is public, then people could be doing data aggregation and using that to target you, right? If Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and et cetera, all had my credit card history, then they'd probably only show me things that I've already bought. And that's just like one kind of small side effect, right? Like, what if I actually have something that's a health condition that I would like to stay private? I don't want people to see that I'm spending a lot of money on doctor's appointments. Then there are all of these things. And I think that everybody has something where you can come up with an example of, here's a financial transaction I had that there's someone in the world I don't want to know, right? And can you come up with some examples in your mind, at least?
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I think that you touch a little fiber there. Like a lot of people are like, okay, no, I don't want anyone to know that I bought so many socks. Or that I think about it.
I mean,
I don't want
socks
my
isn't the
mom to
most
know.
relatable example, but right, everyone
Yeah.
has something that is kind of like you don't want everybody to know.
Especially in quarantine, with so many people buying so many different stuff online.
Sure.
Yeah.
And this is like, we used to have cash, and cash had those privacy guarantees. But now in the digital age, as we're coming up on a new idea of how currency works, already the majority of money that exchanged in the world is only digital. You know, I think the number I heard was 70%. So, but we're moving towards one that's getting more and more digital. And this could be used for surveillance, and this could be used for people who are in power to maintain that power, right? If they know what you're buying, what you're dependent on, what your consumption patterns are, they can use this information against you. And maybe it's happening today, maybe it's not happening today. But if we're headed down a road where everything becomes public or available to a small group of people, this can definitely be used against you. Because money is the way that we exchange services and goods, and this is supposed to be a means of exchange. And if it's all public, that happens less and less. So,
Well, yeah.
so it doesn't matter if this one transaction can be public and this one can be private. Because if you go, here are most of my transactions, but don't worry about that one, then that one's not very private. Then it's like, okay, well, that's super sketchy. Clearly something is up. Let's go check it out. And then you can track, because on the chain, things are connected, right? It's a chain. And so if you can get some parts of it, then you might be able to fill in over here. And if you can get that part of it and that part of it and this part of it, then like you might be able to start putting together the whole picture. And so,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, but just to have it completely clear for anybody who doesn't know anything, to this day, is it possible to track transactions to the end, to the sender, to the end user in the network? Can you see what I'm buying with Bitcoin today?
Yeah. Okay. Unfortunately, the answer is complicated. It's
Okay.
sometimes.
Sometimes. Okay.
And it depends on how the users are using it.
All
So a
right.
user can use it in a way that you cannot track it, or the
Okay.
likelihood of it being discovered is really, really, really small. On the other hand, a
Right.
user can use it in a way that it is so easy and so obvious. So,
Okay. Put me the two examples, please.
okay, yeah. So one example of making it very obvious is so we have these things called addresses in Bitcoin, right? And so that's how you send and receive. You might say, here's my address, please send me some Bitcoin. And so if there's supposed to be one-time use, every time you're supposed to use a new address. And that way, it's less of a link. But if a user reuses the same address every single time, then you can pretty much just go, oh, everything that's happened on, 3B1FS
Yeah. In the
is,
same address, like maybe like in the same bank account. If you're always using the same bank account, and everybody's like you can track that same bank account and say, hey, this belongs to the name, the last name, the date of birth, the socks. All right.
Exactly. So
Okay.
if you're treating it like an account, everyone can observe everything. And it's not supposed to be used as an account. Unfortunately, a lot of people still use it that way, but it's supposed to be used as a one-time address. And so people can't make the link between everything that's going on.
All right. And now, how do I keep it to myself?
Yeah. So there are a lot of user level mechanisms that are possible to keep it to yourself. And in general, privacy is a gradient. It's not a Boolean. It's like you can have more private of transactions. You can never have 100% private transaction or 0% private transactions. So you can make it more and more private. So different ways of doing that, for starters, don't use the same address, number one.
All right.
Number two is making sure how you're creating transactions. And so a lot of that is in how you're selecting coins or UTXOs, which can become like you need to learn about it and stuff, or you need to use a software that does that in a good way for you. So there are different wallets like Wasabi Wallet that really prioritizes privacy. So if you're using one of those softwares, then you can have a lot more private of transactions. But if you're using a very popular exchange, then that requires you to take a photo of your driver's license, then your transactions are not going to be very private. So if you want to
All
be a
right.
super user, you can hook it up to Tor and have multiple computers and sign the transaction on one and broadcast it on another. But I don't think that, I mean, that's not how I do it. and I don't think that it, I think that the world I would like to live in and the world that I'm trying to build is one where the base layer of the Bitcoin protocol has privacy so that the end users don't have to think about it too much. Right now, where Bitcoin is at, is that there are ways to have it to serve your privacy, but the users have to think about it quite a lot in how they're using it. And so I think that you want it to be usable, and privacy loves company. The more people do it, the more private it is. So I would like to be thinking about those sorts of problems so that the end users don't have to.
Beautiful sentiment. I support your struggle. Uh, all right. So now, uh, I'd like to have your thoughts in right in this in this same train of thought. What are your thoughts on what you've seen of user experience of Bitcoin Core? What's to be improved in your opinion?
Yeah, I think the user experience has a long way to go. And at the same time, I think that the user experience has come a really long way. If you think about it, it's a money that's 10 years old. It's a baby. And so I think that.
Wait, Bitcoin is like a fifth grader, I think.
It
Oh,
was
those are the
released in
worst.
2009, so it's 11. So fifth grader, yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, that little brat. So,
Um, but if you're talking about human time, right? It's like how dog years are sped up, right? So if you're talking about in terms of money, well, it's 10 or 11 years old compared to what was the most recent currency, you know, like
yeah.
hundreds of years old. So in
Maybe.
comparison, maybe it's
Yeah.
1 years old, maybe it's a few months old in human words, right? Like it's a
Yeah.
baby.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so your question was, I got distracted.
What's to be? Don't worry, because we stay with a little fifth grader, you know.
I was just
Um,
imagining like this Bitcoin money child.
No, I was
So
asking you about user experience,
yeah,
what to be improved. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that I would love to see, like, there's this privacy element, for example, where a lot of different wallets and stuff have to improve it. Bitcoin Core itself does have a user interface, but it's not a good one. it's I don't use it. I would not recommend it. And so I think that's an element in which we need to like, and we will, but is kind of new, right? It's been a project that's very focused on the technology and making sure it's robust. And those are still really, really important. But as we move forward, we need to make it usable so that if a end user wants to use Bitcoin Core rather than having to um, keep their private keys on an exchange or interact with a software that they've a third party software that they've downloaded, that would be ideal. Like, I think that would be a great way to um, provide that service. So I think that we could do a lot with design. I think it's also a very powerful way, having clean user experiences, to spread the message, right? Like, as a user, I don't want to be having to, like, oh, okay, I have to go learn for 5 weeks before I can do anything. It's like, I want to be educated along the way, but I also want to not have to figure every single thing out. And I think that's so important in an age where we're overloaded with information. And right now, we're still in very early stages of Bitcoin, and there is a ton of information, but it can be really hard to navigate and it's really hard to parse. So I would like to see more development in making that accessible. And so that's something, I've been working on, are creating these little comics or zines as a way to share technical fundamentals of how does Bitcoin Core and the Bitcoin underlying concepts work. And I think people have been responding really positively to them because they're not necessarily hungry for information, they're hungry for learning. And sometimes more information doesn't always mean more learning. And you need to, like, make it in ways that you can wrap your head around that piece of information. And so having a little visual element, I think, makes it a lot easier to just understand the concept that's being shared. Uh,
It does. Yeah.
yeah.
No, I have always thought that, okay, you have the white papers and then you have the conferences and now you have the online conferences. Okay, but and then you have all the rap. You have so many. There's so many. Have you ever entered Instagram and noticed that when you try to put music, you put Bitcoin, and then there's all these rap songs about Bitcoin?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. There's a bunch of them.
Interesting.
Yeah, so like this connection of trying to make Bitcoin more approachable through let's say pop culture and things like comics. I think that it's very well received, and even better if it's by a person who's actually working on the code. So yes, please keep doing it.
Yeah, if anybody is interested in helping me with the design elements, or you were saying that we might collaborate on translating it to Spanish, I think that would be really exciting. Anyone, if you're interested in, like, helping me further this project, something I'm excited about, but definitely have a limited capacity. So please reach out if you're willing to help. But
Translators needed.
yeah, translators, designers, like any, I think there's a lot of different ways to contribute
To
if you're
spread,
interested.
yeah, to
Yeah,
spread the
and by designer,
knowledge.
I'm saying, like, I've been making them, and I just, like, started drawing little boxes 2 weeks ago. Like, I'm not my, my qualifications here are not high. I'm just learning.
I make comics. I make comics. Okay, I'm a designer. It's on my LinkedIn now.
But I think it's so important. That's actually conveniently right here. I have a Bitcoin pillow. So
Oh, wait. Show it one more time. I love it. I'm loving it.
I love it.
Yeah, it's so cool. And okay, let's touch one more subject that I think that it's in everybody's mind these days: the halving.
Sure. But one more
Yeah,
quick thing. I see a live comment, so maybe we can answer that and then talk about the halving.
of course. Okay, here Marina. She's a great friend. She works in PR. Says, who are 2 to 3 coders that inspired you to join Bitcoin Core? And what knowledge or insight do you wish you knew earlier in your career? Digging deep.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to start with the second question. I mean, uh, first, I'd like to acknowledge I feel very early in my Bitcoin career. I only have been contributing for a little over a year since I made my first contribution. But that said, I have been working in tech for a few years, and I think that I now know more than I did a year ago. And it doesn't, I think, regardless of where you are at, the most important message that I could share with myself or anybody else is have focus and have confidence that you can learn what you would want to learn, and create a path that allows you to take small steps towards what your goal is, and then really focus on that. You know, there's so much information, there's so much noise, especially crypto, blockchain, Bitcoin, a lot of conversation about the price, all of those things. I think for me, what's more important is the fundamentals. So identify a learning path that allows you to focus on what the fundamentals are. So even if you are interested in the price, right? Then create kind of like a curriculum for yourself so that you can learn the skills that are I don't know what analysts do, but whatever they do, you could learn those skills, right? Don't just like aimlessly get some information. If you're interested in the technology, even if you don't code right now, then if you wanted to, you could learn. It's totally possible, and there are skills you could, if you didn't do any programming ever before, but you wanted to contribute to Bitcoin Core, then I would say start by taking an online class like Khan Academy or Udemy or something like that, and learn a programming language, probably Python, and then read Jimmy Song's Programming Bitcoin book, familiarize yourself with the Bitcoin protocol, and then that would put you in a position to start making some small PRs in the test framework, which is entirely in Python. And that I think somebody could accomplish if they are serious and if you spent 1 hour a day for a year or a year and a half, I think that you can go from not knowing how to code into getting a small PR accepted in Bitcoin. So regardless of where you're at, know that you can, and come up with a realistic way so that you can take small steps towards achieving that amount to something. And I really like being outside. So I see everything in like metaphors. And so the way I see it is I love backpacking in the mountains. And the way I see it is like, you can go on 1,000 different small day hikes, right? Do an hour of hiking here one day, an hour of hiking there another day, a couple hours one day. But that's different than going backpacking and climbing a mountain. Because if you if you take those same number of steps, you could walk around the block thousands of times, but that could also amount to you being at the top of Mount Whitney. Or, I mean, that's a local metaphor. The tallest in America, contiguous. But anyways, you could go to the top of Everest even, although that's pretty hard. But but you could get there.
Look
There's
at
a lot
you.
of
No, that's great. Actually, I don't know what's your take on this, but there is in the average culture of Bitcoin and crypto, but mostly Bitcoin because there's where the most of the hype is. Maybe
Mm.
there's this uh, overall way of thinking of you can do anything you want. It's like again, that maybe that's why it's a fifth grader because it's like seeing it in the eyes of a kid. Like there's this whole perspective like I'm going to grow up to be a fucking president. Like but everybody, 40 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old, they just arrive and they want to eat the world because it's new. You're new in this. Everybody's new in this. Okay, we're agree on this. Okay, let's do it. Like everybody has plans. Everybody can do whatever they want, and that's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's really all about empowerment and freedom. And sometimes that can be scary and overwhelming. So you have to remind yourself that you can do it.
Beautiful words. All right. So, as promised, we're going to talk about the halving. So, how? Please explain to the audience what's exactly the halving and why does this happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, a little plug is I did just release a comic today about the halving,
Okay.
and so please share that. I can
Of
give
course.
the links
Yeah,
after.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
so I think that really helps capture the idea probably a little bit better than I can do right now, but I'll give it a shot.
Please do.
So the only way that new Bitcoin are ever created are in something called the Block Subsidy. So this is a reward that creates new Bitcoin and then gives it to the miner that mined the block. And so this is a crucial incentive mechanism in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And that's how miners are rewarded for doing this important function to the system. And so there is a very well specified emission schedule. So when Bitcoin first started, each block got a reward of 50 Bitcoin. And then there are increments. And after a certain amount of blocks, the subsidy of the block, the reward of created Bitcoin, drops by half. It gets halved. So the halving is the block where that happens. And so we've had, this is the third one. And so that's going to be coming up at block.
Like in 5 days, maybe like 5 to 6 days.
Sure. It's at block like, it's 6-3 and a bunch of zeros, I think. That's, like, can I check my comic?
Okay.
But so it's coming up at a specific block, and whenever that block gets mined, that will be the first one that goes to the new reward. And then for the next approximately 4 years, that will be the new reward. And so this is a way of having a finite supply. And this is the way that the 21 million limit of possible coins in circulation can be enforced.
All right. Sweet. And if there is a way to explain how does this happens at a technical level?
Sure. The way it works is that the code enforces it. And what that means is that every single user that's running a full node, that's running Bitcoin Core, every time they get a block, they check it and they verify that that is actually upheld, that according to what number this block is. So even if you start a node today, that's the sort of thing that your node is doing. It's verifying that, okay, this is block X. According to this rule set, block X is only allowed to have a maximum of this amount of block subsidy. Great. That's true. So it's something that you can, go look in the code pretty easily. If you know what you're looking for, then, which also is actually highlighted in the comic. But
We know you are an artist.
no. Well, I think that visual learning is really important. So for me, and especially all these numbers and stuff, that's, you can tell, like, right now I'm like, oh my gosh, I should remember exactly what number it is. But that's why seeing it on paper helps me make sense of it a lot.
Don't worry, yeah.
I'm not trying to just toot my own horn.
No worries. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, one more thing. ¿qué consejo le darías a los que están comenzando a aprender sobre Bitcoin?
Sí, es el mismo que estaba diciendo en inglés, pero ten atención. Pregúntate por qué Bitcoin es importante para ti y pensar sobre estas preguntas para tener dirección y atención. Hay mucha información y mucha posibilidad con qué vas a hacer. Y por esta razón es muy importante decidir qué quieres y saber que si quieres, puedes. Si quieres aprender, puedes. Y, y si tienes tu razón y tienes dirección, vas a aprender mucho.
Excellent.
My conjugations are not great.
No, it was. Don't be so hard on yourself. Thank you so much for your time today, Amiti. It was a
Yeah.
blast.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, bye.
Bye.